Ladies and gentlemen, we have Representative Eric Sorensen in today. He represents the Illinois 17th Congressional District. Eric, thank you for being here today.
Good to be with you.
Awesome. Well, to start, I think it would be most useful if we can have you introduce yourself. I mean, you're a familiar face in the area, don't get me wrong, but just give us a little bit about who you are.
Well, I tell you, growing up in Rockford, Illinois, the only thing that I really wanted to be was the weatherman on TV when I grew up. And so I got to live my childhood dream. I worked at WREX in Rockford, Illinois, and I thought I was going to retire from that place. But it turns out there was this opening in Moline, Illinois. And I'll never forget walking into the newsroom at WQAD, and I saw all of these people that had worked here 10, 20 years. And I wanted to know why they stayed, why they came here to the Quad Cities and stayed. And it didn't take me long to realize the value of this place. Because as Quad citizens, we don't hold it against somebody if they grew up somewhere else. We just say, when did you move here? Oh, that's great, because now you're one of us. I tell you, after 7 years of working in the studio here, there was a call to service. We were going through a pandemic, and we didn't have people making good decisions. And I remember it doesn't make sense for me to be mad at my neighbors when they're getting bad information. We need better communication of what's going on. And then I realized I just spent 20 years of my life in the same congressional district, learning who the people are. And you know this, and everybody that works in local television, we don't work for the TV station, we work for the people. And so my job today is still working for the people, but just in a different way.
That's right. And you kind of jumped ahead of the gun, because I was going to ask you, you spent a lot of time here at WQAD, but also being a meteorologist at other different locations. So you mentioned COVID. Was that sort of time span, was that when you felt like it was time to run for office, or was there a particular moment that stood out to you?
I think we asked a lot of people. And I think, as we go forward through 2024, we've forgotten already how hard that was. We've forgotten our neighbors who we lost during COVID. We've forgotten about our small businesses that we forced to close, but nobody ever went back to those small businesses and said, how can we help you today? I want to be able to be that person to say, all right, you struggled through COVID, you made it. Now, how can I help? And I think that's what we need in representation in Washington. It's somebody that we already know is our neighbor, somebody who isn't going to just throw BS at us, but somebody who's going to tell the truth. I'm not saying I got the weather right every day when I was in the studio, but you know what? I think a lot of people don't realize that it wasn't so much that I just showed up when the lights were on or when the red light was on the camera. I came here so early in the morning beforehand to prepare, right? How do I need to communicate what's ahead? And so now today, it's communicating. What are the threats that we have ahead, and how can we plan for that so that our kids and our grandkids are going to be able to survive what we give them? They're going to prosper.
So the community ties are sort of what you mentioned as being what gave you the confidence to go from meteorology all the way to the House.
It's really the people. I mean, it's all about the people that I serve. I was talking to a gentleman in Cuba, Illinois, in Fulton County. He was flooded out of his home on July 15th, and I went down there afterwards to say, how can we get help to you? And he told me a story. And he said, I work at the Casey's General Store. I work 50 hours a week because I need to work 50 hours a week because my wife is on disability at home. Her disability is determined by how much I work. But then we were flooded out of our home. And he goes, we don't have insurance. We have no insurance. And then this flood where 14 inches of rain happened at once and they were flooded out of their home. This is where FEMA needs to come in. And so I went there and I said, you know what? I'm going to work as hard as it takes to get you the help you need. But you know what Robert said to me?
What did he say?
He said, I know you're going to do that, Eric, because you're one of us. So that really stuck in here, because it wasn't somebody in Washington, it wasn't somebody even in the Quad Cities that said you're one of us. It was somebody who is working as hard as they can in Cuba, Illinois, but they need help. They need someone to help them. And so I was just down there this week in Cuba, Illinois, where $800,000 has come back to the people there that were affected by that flood. It took a lot of work to be able to do that. But I'm glad That's what service is about.
So I was going to ask you, what were some of your proudest moments over the last 2 years? Would you say that that would be one of them, or what would some other moments be, I guess, while you've served for the last 2 years?
Right. I'll tell you, it was the one thing where I called my mom and I said, this was the most important thing I've ever done in my life. It has nothing to do with me being in Congress or being able to walk into the United States Capitol. Although I'll tell you, I sit under that Capitol dome a lot by myself at night and I say, what is the meaning? What is my purpose for being here? My purpose for being here is to help people like Rold Zvonek. He's 98 years old. He lives here in the Illinois Quad Cities, and he's a World War II vet. Both of my grandpas were World War II vets. And so when his grandchildren came to our office and said, our grandfather never received his medals from World War II. And so we went to work. It took 3 months of hard work to get these medals physically in our hands. But then we put together a celebration in East Moline where we were able to honor Rold Zvonek, 98 years old. He drove himself to the celebration. But then I got to physically pin those on a World War II vet. That was the most important thing I've ever done in my life.
Wow.
And that's what service is about. It's about taking care of Rold Zvonek and all of our vets.
There you go. And jumping the gun a little bit, but looking back at the district's history, 4 of the last 5 representatives have all been Democrats, you being one of them. When you see a challenger like Joe McGraw, what sort of challenges does he pose just as a candidate himself?
Look, I look back at the history of this district all the way back to the late, great Lane Evans. I wish that I could ask Lane Evans some of the things that I don't know about yet, because I'm only in my first term in Congress. But he was able, as a Democrat, to represent everyone in this district. And he did so well until he was diagnosed with Parkinson's, had to step down. And so I look at what I need to do today. It's walking in the footsteps of Lane Evans, doing right by everybody in the district, even the people that haven't voted for me. If I didn't earn their vote last time, and maybe I won't earn their vote this time, maybe the next time I will, right? So how do I do that? How do I show my work? How do I make sure that I'm working across the aisle? Like, I have an 84.1% bipartisan score. That means 8 out of 10 pieces of legislation that have my signature on it, they have a Republican signature on it. It means working across the aisle to pass a GOP farm bill. I said yes to that farm bill because I put enough farmers and stakeholders and people in ag and people at John Deere around the table to say, let's look at this legislation, let's go line by line. Is this good legislation for you? It doesn't matter if it's good for me. And so I did vote for the GOP farm bill. And then it was unanimous. 14 counties out of the 14 counties I serve, all 14 Illinois Farm Bureau board members said yes to my endorsement because I am willing to work across the aisle. And so, when I have a challenger that tries to peddle conspiracy theories, I don't pay much attention to that because let's be honest, when you're driving a car and you're in a race and you're in the lead, you don't waste any of your attention by looking in the rearview mirror.
Got it. Understood. I know one of the other things that you're looking to change or deal with is inflation. From what I was on your website, I remember seeing that it was one of your top priorities. Yeah. It's something that a lot of Americans are dealing with across the country. But can you just kind of tell me a little bit about why is it the number one thing for you?
Well, look, the cost of everything, how it's gone up since the pandemic. We shut off the world's economy, and then we had to start it back up. The United States is leading the way, but it's still hard. There's still so many of my neighbors across the Quad Cities that are, and across this district and the nation really, that are struggling today. And then I look, all right, as a member of Congress, what can I do? What is realistic? And I think back to my pharmacist at City Line Plaza. I go to the Jewel Osco. My neighbors they've known for many years which grocery store I go to. But I talk to my pharmacist, right? And this goes back years, way before I was in Congress. I've learned so many things along this way. That the cost or the price of that orange pill bottle is one of the most inflated things. The cost keeps going up. And my pharmacist has told me stories that how heartbreaking it is when you see a senior citizen slide it, they tear open the bag and they slide back an orange bottle because they've got a shopping cart from Jewel. They have to eat, right? And I think, it's so upsetting to me that people play politics with this issue, or they say it's someone else's fault when no one's coming up with the solutions. And so I have the Stop Games Act, which would expedite getting generics to market so that orange pill bottle is affordable again. Because right now, Big Pharma is making these huge profits, and they're not allowing the generic to get to market. So as the FDA studies the efficacy of a drug, it's like going around a monopoly board, okay? When you get to the orange and the blue, when you get to Park Place and Boardwalk, okay? The pharmaceutical companies say, no, the FDA, we've got more data. We throw more data at you. And so the FDA has to go all the way back to start. Do not collect $200, right? But what that does is it delays getting that generic to market. And so senior citizens especially, they're the ones that pay the price. And so Stop Games Act, getting this through Congress in the next term, in the 119th Congress, that's what I'm going to focus on because it will lower the cost of something that is incredibly inflated.
Another major community that we have here in this district, labor workers, very essential,
Right.
very crucial to what we have going on here in this area. So can you kind of talk about what have you done to represent them and what do you hope to continue to do?
Well, look, I grew up in Rockford. If you've been on I-90, you know that there's the giant Chrysler plant. I remember growing up there thinking how cool the bright green Dodge Neon was. I wanted a Dodge Neon so bad because they were built right there. Well, they closed that plant. And so even though that is not in my district, it's part of who I am, being born and raised in Rockford. So it was working with Congressman Bill Foster, and we marched down to the White House, and we said, you can't close this plant and then open one in a so-called right-to-work state like Georgia and then call it a win, because the workers there are not taken care of like they are at the UAW plant. And so we said, no, you can't do this. But then we got an incentive package with the Secretary of Energy to be able to open that plant again. Now what we're seeing is the Stellantis, the owner of that factory, is saying, well, maybe we'll think about it. No, you agreed to it. And we brought the president to Belvedere to say that the UAW strike was over because of this agreement, this handshake. And now Stellantis doesn't want to make good. And so it's holding their feet to the fire. The same way that I will do with John Deere. With all of these layoffs that are going on. As soon as these layoffs were going on, I was on the phone and I said, I'm coming to Deere and Company. I'm coming to the world headquarters and I want answers. And so it was sitting down in the boardroom. Guess what? The boardroom doesn't make me nervous because I'm working for the people, right? So I'm sitting there at the boardroom and I said, tell me right here, right now, that since 1844, John Deere has been here and you're going to be headquartered in Moline, Illinois. And the executive said, absolutely. And I said, tell me when you're going to have more layoffs. I need to know that. These are my constituents, and you're leaving them out there in the lurch. And they promised that there would be better communication, right? It's getting to the floor at East Moline's Harvester Works and saying now to the people, I got your back. That's what a member of Congress needs to do, because it's all about this. I got to make sure that John Deere is competitive in the world marketplace, but then also I work for the people. So what's best for the people in the end is making sure that John Deere is going to be around for another 180 years.
And as you talk about working for the people, one of the people's biggest issues, abortion rights, are one of their biggest concerns as we head into this election season.
Unfortunately, right now it is.
Yes, yep. This is the first time that a lot of voters will be able to select an official since Roe v. Wade was overturned in June of 2022. So I would like to use this moment as a time to give you a chance to say where your campaign stands on abortion and talk about, your general thoughts on the issue.
This bridge right here. I have talked to women who live in Des Moines, who they have to drive to the Quad Cities, but then they have to get across that bridge to be able to see the Welcome to Illinois sign before they have health care again. How in God's name is that right? We have to make sure that people are connected to good quality reproductive health care. The fact that any politician or any Supreme Court justice could think that that is best for all people, it's beyond me. But also, it's going to take more men like me to stand up for our women, to be able to say, you know what, I am going to vote for this. This is a voting issue for me because I care about you. But also understand that, and I think too few people are willing to talk about it this way, we should have fewer abortions in this country. There should be few. Here's the thing, and it's okay to want fewer abortions, because what I want to be able to see is that women have better access to contraception, to IVF. I want more women to have access to prenatal health care and postnatal health care and child care, so that it isn't as much of a burden for people to make that hardest decision. But when the hardest decision has to be made, a politician can't be in that room. It should be the family, it should be the woman, and it should be her doctor. And leaving it up to states to make that decision, I just look back and I think back, what would our country be like today in 2024 if in the 1960s, when we decided civil rights, if we would have just made it a state's issue? Imagine how terrible this country would have been.
Thank you for your thoughtful answer, Eric. And the very last thing that I'm going to ask you, how can people keep up with you and your campaign as we head into election night?
I think the most important thing is people have to make that decision today, that I am going to vote. That if you're not registered to vote, I'm going to get registered to vote, and I'm going to go and do this thing. Because this is one of the most important elections of our lifetime. You know, I remember when in 2008, I went and voted for Barack Obama, not knowing what Barack Obama could do. But I voted for him because it was so important. And I remember feeling that. Well, today we're going to give young people especially the ability to feel something when they go and vote, because there's something different about this election. It's about saying, are we going to go forward, or are we going to take things back to whatever time the other side wants to go back to? And so for more people to get information, it's ericforillinois.com. Find me on Facebook. I answer all of the Facebook messages on our Facebook page. But I think it's more important than ever to vote for the person that you've known for about 20 years.
Got it. Ladies and gentlemen, Eric Sorensen.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. This is fantastic.
Good.